Kim Wall was a fiercely independent journalist whose reporting spanned the intersections of identity, gender, culture, social justice, and global politics. Her voice reached audiences around the world through publications such as The New York Times, The Guardian, Harpers, Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, Vice, Time, and many others. Her work, often translated into multiple languages, reflected her commitment to telling stories that cut across borders and challenged assumptions. Her career was marked by curiosity and courage. In 2013, she reported from post-war Sri Lanka as a South Asian Journalist Association grantee. A year later, she became a United Nations Foundation Press Fellow, returning again in 2015. That same year, she traveled to Haiti to examine the fragile tourism industry after a devastating earthquake, supported by the European Journalist Center's Innovation and Development Program. By 2016, Kim was exploring Cuba's emerging tech culture as a Pulitzer Center grantee, while also documenting the unexpected presence of a Chinatown in Uganda as part of the International Women's Media Foundation's African Great Lakes Fellowship. She later became an inaugural IWMF Fellow for Women's Stories, a grant that brought her back to Sri Lanka to investigate the role of feminism in guerrilla warfare. Her reporting on climate change and nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands earned her the Hanzel Mieth Prize for Best Digital Reportage. Kim's academic journey reflected the same rigor as her journalism. She earned a Bachelor of Science in International Relations from the London School of Economics and went on to complete dual master's degrees in journalism and international affairs at Columbia University, graduating with honors. Her life was tragically cut short in August 2017, a devastating loss to the world of journalism and to the many communities whose stories she amplified with compassion and integrity. The murder of Kim Wall, today, on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. Hello and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, Tales of Mishaps, Misfortune, and Misadventures. I'm your host, Rich Napolitano. Today's episode is directly at the intersection of true crime and maritime history. This is the 2017 story of the murder of Swedish journalist Kim Wall. Being a true crime story, I invited a true crime writer, Alfred Dockery from Blue Ridge True Crime, to join me. Alfred, thanks so much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Now, before we get into the story, let's talk a little bit about your work as a true crime writer and researcher. What is it that you do and what do you publish?
Well, I write about true crimes in Appalachia on my blog and Substack, which are Blue Ridge True Crime. And I write about your more everyday crimes on medium.com under the pseudonym Alfred Dockery. I may have needed to put a little bit more thought into that, but that's how I roll.
Okay, and BlueRidgeTrueCrime.com is your website?
That's my website, and I'm also Blue Ridge True Crime at Substack.
All right. And I've read many of your pieces, and they're very entertaining. I'm a true crime fan myself, true crime podcasts as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's good stuff. Now, this case it's very tragic, first of all, of course, and it's brutal, and we're going to shy away from being too gory in our descriptions here, but it really is a terrible case of murder, a little bit of a mystery. So before we get into the details and the nitty-gritty, can you give just a brief overview of what this case is about and who it involves?
Kim Wall was a brilliant and accomplished freelance journalist, and she was living in Copenhagen, and she had come across this story about two companies that were in a space race to be the first private company to achieve crewed space flight. And obviously, having a story like that on her doorstep, she pursued it, and in March of 2017, and that was how it all started.
And Kim Wall was a freelance journalist from Sweden. But how did she get involved in this story with Peter Madsen and his submarine?
August of 2017, she finally got a text back from Madsen, and he invited her to his shop for tea. And she went and talked to him, and he offered to do the interview with her, but he wanted to do it on his submarine. So he proposed that they go for like a 2-hour cruise, and during that trip, he would answer her questions.
And of course, now Peter Madsen himself is an important character in the story.
Well, Madsen was an inventor and an entrepreneur. He started building rockets as a teenager and developed his first large rocket, a 1 meter height one, in secondary school, which would be like junior college here in the United States. He co-founded Copenhagen Suborbitals with Christian von Benson. Their goal was to launch someone into space, and I think Madsen was hoping that it would be him.
Yeah. Just what hit me just now as you were talking about that was the story of the Titan submersible and Stockton Rush, who was just this character, let's say, who went off on his own and built this submersible to take people down to the Titanic. Was a little bit of a rogue, not a little bit, a lot of one. So Peter Madsen reminds me a lot of him. He wasn't formerly schooled as an engineer or anything similar to that, but he was, I guess you'd say, a pretty smart guy, self-taught.
He learned the skills he needed to make the rockets and to build the submarines, but he never really completed much in the way of formal education. He had no degrees, he had no certifications. He was just a bit of a wild card.
That's an understatement, as it turns out. So let's go back to that day that you were summarizing earlier. Kim Wall arranges to meet Peter Madsen at the submarine UC3 for an interview.
She met Madsen at the sub about 7 p.m. And so she boards the submarine and they head out to sea. And several people took photographs of them heading out.
Yeah.
She and her partner, Obi Stobe, had a going away party planned for that night. And she convinced him to let her go out on the sub, figuring it would only take a couple hours and she'd make it back for the tail end of the party. And they were actually on the beach doing a cookout, and they actually saw the submarine head out to sea. About 8:16, Kim texted Oli, and the text read, "I'm still alive, by the way, but going down now. I love you." And he brought coffee and cookies, though. And over time, this would become a very chilling message.
Yeah, that she would send that message. I'm still alive, just so you know. I wonder if she knew at the time that maybe she was getting into something, or if it was just meant to be a little bit of a joke. Who knows? But that's creepy.
I have to think that she was joking, but it really turned out to be chilling.
Yeah. So they leave from the marina there, and they're seen by a few people, and some pictures are taken. And that's the point where we don't really know exactly what happened, but we do know what the outcome was. What was the next we heard from Madsen after they disappeared for this, quote, 2-hour tour?
Around sometime after midnight, most sources say 1:45 a.m., her boyfriend reported her missing. So he called the cops and they called the Danish Navy, and the Navy started searching for the sub. They sent out 2 helicopters and 3 ships, and they also alerted the public, because the more eyes they could get on it, the better.
And obviously, Kim Wall's boyfriend is concerned because they didn't come back, and she's missing. So now the search is on. When did they find the submarine? They did find it eventually.
The UC-3 Nautilus was sighted at 10:30 a.m. from the Drogden Lighthouse, and around 11 o'clock, one of the just a everyday sailing crew, they were out fishing, they came upon the Nautilus and they saw Madsen wave to them, and then he went down into the sub. He was down there for about 30 seconds, and he came back up to the conning tower, and then the sub sank underneath him, and he swam over to their boat.
Ah, interesting. Okay. I didn't realize when I first was reading through this story that it sank after he departed, after he disembarked the sub. I thought it had wrecked and then he just got away, but that's interesting. That is a crucial little bit of evidence. Once he was spotted, he takes off he goes back in for a moment and then comes back out, and then the sub sank.
Yeah, he claimed there was some sort of technical fault with the ballast tanks, but the police came to believe that he just basically turned them on and then headed for the conning tower, and it just went out from under him.
And what happened to Madsen at that point?
They took him ashore, and he was questioned, and he said that he had dropped Wall off about 10:30 p.m. that night, and about 3.5 hours into the trip, and then just decided to do some more sailing around on the sub. I like to refer to that as the she's fine defense. The search begins for her, and obviously that she isn't found.
So he claimed that he just dropped her off, and that was the last he saw of her.
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, though, she wasn't around and no evidence of her. How did the police react to that?
The police were on him from the jump. And I'm going to have to speculate just a little bit here because I can't find a source that really says exactly what happened. But either there was something about him that made them doubt his story. They found traces of blood on his fatigues, and they found traces on his nose. They may have seen that, or there may have been something else, or it may be that they had run into Madsen before and had already kind of marked him as a suspicious character.
But obviously, it's very suspicious. I'm sure the police didn't buy his story. I know that Madsen gets arrested at some point. Was it directly when they found him, or what's the timeline there? How long did it take for him to get arrested?
He was arrested the same day that the sub sank, August 11th.
Okay. And then the search is on. Obviously, there's no evidence of Kim. But they did find the sub. It was found in Kaya Bay. I think that's how it's pronounced, or at least as close as I can get as an English speaker. But obviously, the sub is now resting on the bottom of the bay, and they were able to extract it.
On the next day, Saturday, August 12th, he has a pre-detention hearing, and that's where he changes his story and says that he had lost his grip on a 70-kilogram, 155-pound hatch cover, and that had fallen on Wall's head, and that killed her, and that he decided to bury her at sea. I've labeled that one the whoopsies defense.
The whoopsies defense. Yeah. So now he has told two stories: that he left Kim Wall back at the dock, and another where, yes, she did die because the hatch hit her head. So now the question obviously is, where is she?
Yes, that is the $64,000 question.
Yeah. So I know that they continued the search. Her body was not found right away.
On Sunday, the police raised the sub, and they brought it ashore in North Copenhagen, and they donned their hazmat suits, and they started checking around the sub to see what they could find. At one point, like a week later, they brought in a cargo scanner, and they scanned the sub to see if there were any hidden compartments. They were very serious about this search. So basically, they don't really have much. And then 10 days later, on the 21st, a dismembered torso washes ashore, and it's found by a passing cyclist.
Yeah. I don't like to get too graphic because there's really not a reason to. But once they find the torso, obviously they were going to do some forensic analysis on it. What kind of evidence were they able to gather from finding that torso?
Well, the torso had metal weights attached to it. Obviously, someone was trying to prevent it from floating up. And they found 15 stab wounds on the torso. Then on Wednesday, the 23rd of August, the police come out with a statement and they say that based on DNA testing, the headless torso belongs to Wall. And that's where the story explodes.
Yeah. These kind of stories get to me. Such senseless violence, such senseless murder. I just want to reach out and hug her family or give them some kind of support, because it really is such a waste, such a senseless crime.
It is senseless.
So at this point now, they have some changing stories from Madsen. They have the wrecked sub. They found the torso. They've confirmed that it's Kim Wall's body. When were charges coming against Madsen? What was he charged with?
They immediately charged him with killing Kim Wall in an unknown manner in an unknown place. And then later, around October 30th, they charged him with premeditated murder, dismembering her corpse, and sexual assault.
And at this point, they don't have her head or limbs. Were those ever found?
Well, on October 30th, the Copenhagen police reported that Madsen had changed his story. Now he said that Kim died of a carbon monoxide poisoning. And he said that he had been up on the deck of the sub and that the hatch closed and the motor was running, and that caused fumes into the interior of the sub and that killed her. He also admitted to dismembering her body, claiming that he couldn't get the body out of the submarine any other way. Somehow, in his twisted mind, that seemed like an explanation. And then later on October 6th, found her severed head and her legs in weighted bags, and they also found her clothes, socks, and shoes, and a knife about a kilometer from where the torso was found. There was no sign of blunt force trauma to her skull, which completely invalidated the hatch accident story.
So he's grasping at straws here, that he obviously never expected them to find her skull or any of her body, but they did.
Perhaps the most puzzling thing about this whole affair is how he ever thought that he would get away with it. It just seems insurmountable, but again, he was not a normal human being. And it's entirely possible that other than trying to hide the body, that he never really thought through the aftermath of the crime.
Is there any indication that perhaps it was a spur of the moment obsession that made him do it? Or do you feel like this was planned?
Well, you have to see it as premeditated. And it looks like he actually brought tools and materials onto the sub with him. You know, later when the police examined a computer from his shop, they found these videos of women being abused and tortured. Some of them were described as snuff films. He claimed that multiple people had access to the computer and that the videos weren't his.
Yep.
That seems to indicate that this is something that had been going through his mind for some time, and that Wall just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
That's hard to hear, but what a shame. So Madsen's excuses now are piling up and contradicting each other and contradicting the evidence that has been gathered against him.
Yes.
What was his defense?
On March 8th of 2018, the trial began, and he pled not guilty. The trial was scheduled for 12 days. There were 37 witnesses. 115 journalists from 15 countries covered the trial, most
Wow.
of them from a video feed in the basement of the courthouse. The court-ordered psychiatric evaluation described him as a narcissistic sociopath lacking in empathy, but not psychotic or delusional. So he didn't have visions, he didn't hear voices, he just was almost completely lacking in empathy. They hadn't caught him that he would have become a serial killer. I don't think he would have ever it would have ever been a one and done event. He testified at the trial and he stuck to the most recent story of the death by carbon monoxide poisoning. He said he tried to get her body out of the sub for 2 hours, and when he couldn't do that, that's when he decided to, as he said, what do you do when you have a big problem? You make it smaller. Again, in no way understanding how other human beings would not be able to accept that as an explanation.
That's just quite disgusting, frankly.
That's disturbing.
Yeah.
So they couldn't really come up with an exact cause of death because the body was dismembered and it was in the water for somewhere between 10 days and a couple months. Theorized that he had either strangled her or he had cut her throat, and that was the cause of death.
So what was the outcome?
Well, on April 25th, he was found guilty on all three of the main charges: premeditated murder, aggravated sexual assault, and desecrating a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison, which is the harshest penalty that Danish law allows. Now, in general, a life sentence in Denmark, from what I've read, is 16 years. So that you stay in prison 16 years, they come back around and ask themselves if you're still dangerous. And then if you are, they, I assume, add another 16 years. Obviously, in this case, they decided to keep him in prison pretty much for his natural life. The judge described the crime as a cynical and planned sexual murder of a severe, brutal nature. And I have to say that sums it up.
Yeah. Madsen goes to prison, and he had a little trouble there. I don't think he enjoyed prison, from what I can tell.
He is obviously he is someone who is prone to difficulty and perhaps comeuppance. So in August of 2018, he was admitted to the prison hospital. He'd been assaulted by an 18-year-old inmate. They really didn't give any other information. They didn't identify the inmate, and they didn't really tell the degree of injury, but it was sufficient to put him in the hospital. And then in another odd twist of the story, a 40-year-old female prison guard who worked there was fired for developing an inappropriate relationship with him. That apparently she had feelings for Madsen and actually apparently fantasized about moving in with him, and they exchanged apparently a great many letters. When the prison found out about this, they immediately fired her. He obviously was a charismatic person, and he was obviously good at manipulating people, and basically she sounds like, in many ways, the ideal person for him to attempt to influence. But this is a man that managed to crowdfund Marines and rockets and get volunteers to help him build them and get people to donate materials. He obviously could turn that personality on like a spotlight when he needed to.
While in prison, he made a shocking confession finally.
On September 10th, The Guardian reported that he had confessed to the crime in secret recordings made by a journalist named Kristan Lineman. And the quote that The Guardian ran said, "Yes, it's my fault she died, and it's my fault because I committed the crime. It's all my fault. There is only one who is guilty, and that is me.
Interesting. I guess that's a confession. He's at least taking responsibility for it after, way after the fact, after creating so many false stories about it. And he, from what I understand, he tried to escape prison as well.
In October of 2020, he broke out of prison. He took a female psychologist hostage, acquired a fake gun and a fake bomb belt, and so they let him out of the prison and they called the cops. He made it somewhere between 400 meters and a kilometer away. One of the unusual things about it, you can actually see photographs in newspapers of police snipers with their dogs watching him sitting with his back against a hedge from 20, 30 yards away.
Wow.
And I'm assuming they were keeping their distance until the bomb squad could arrive.
Yeah. Did he actually have bombs on him?
No, both the gun and the bomb belt were just fakes.
They didn't know that just yet until they got him.
Yeah, that's one of those things you don't want to find out you're wrong about.
It's true. That's a good point again. So where is Peter Madsen today?
He's in prison in Denmark.
Yeah, let's hope so. Now, I first learned about this story on a documentary on TV. I think it was Netflix, one of the streaming platforms. And I remember just being fascinated by it, almost just beyond belief that this happened. Just the circumstances are so bizarre. This private citizen builds his own submarine and just takes it out into the bay with this journalist and winds up murdering her. It was quite sensational. I know in Denmark they called it the submarine case, and it was big news. And still today, I know it's one of those cases, one of those events in a country's history that never gets forgotten.
When I'm researching crimes to write about, whether they're from Appalachia or whether they're anywhere in the world, what I'm always looking for is I'm looking for a crime where when I first read about it, I say to myself, that can't be right. And then if further research determines that it is right, then I get to work. And this is one of those cases where you go, wait a minute. A man murdered a journalist on a submarine and then sank the submarine to hide the crime. And you're like, okay, what were the details?
Yeah. And obviously, being the host of this podcast, the story intrigued me because of its maritime aspect. A lot of the stories that I go into wind up having some criminal element to it eventually. Some crime was committed, but it's usually not intentional. Maybe there's some negligence by a captain or crew member or whatnot, failure of the ship's owners to keep it safe. Those things they didn't try to intentionally kill anybody or hurt or sink the ship, but after the fact, there was some criminal negligence. This is one of those real, true intersections of true crime and maritime history.
It is.
So I found it just intriguing, and even just within the story itself, it's very bizarre, like you said. They go out on the submarine and sink the submarine, and there's a murder on board, and then the aftermath with sadly finding Kim Wall's body parts, and Madsen's cover stories that just were piling up on him that didn't work out. It really is a strange story. Why I wanted to have you on. What other types of media have been about or done on TV or film regarding the story?
There was a TV show in Denmark called The Investigation in 2020, and it focused pretty much solely on the police work and talked to Wall's parents. They completely left Peter Madsen out, and I have to say I applaud that approach. There's also the disappearance of Kim Wall in 2022, a two-part documentary covering the crime and the trial. And then the one you probably watched was Into the Deep, the submarine murder case, 2022, which is a Netflix documentary, which has archival footage of Madsen and his team. And they were originally documenting his rocket projects. And then in the middle of that, he commits a heinous murder. So that was, you have to be a special kind of person to commit a murder when an Australian film crew is hanging out in your shop.
Yeah. Yeah. Very audacious. And that's one of the things that makes this story just outrageous. And no wonder it caught so much attention internationally, not just in Denmark. What was the legacy left behind? A lot of times when something like this happens, there's a memorial or a tribute placed somewhere or something. What has been done to honor Kim Wall's memory?
Kim's parents did not want her remembered as a victim. They wanted her remembered as an extraordinary human being and an outstanding journalist. They set up the Kim Wall Memorial Fund to provide financial support for a female journalist to pursue stories along the lines that Kim's stories pursued, which were things that were based on culture, social justice, human rights. She tended to write about outsiders and outliers. So they wanted that work to continue. They also wrote a book entitled The Silenced Voice, A Life of Journalist Kim Wall. And it really focuses on her legacy and not what happened to her.
Yeah, that's a nice tribute. And even doing something like this podcast, I always have some reservations about, because it's more about keeping the memory alive of those that were involved and those that lost their lives. I think we would all like to be remembered when we're gone, at least by somebody.
When I started my blog, I gave it the tagline, Keeping History Alive, One Crime at a Time. And one of the things that I found startling about this, I will write about a murder in Tennessee in 1906, or a man who gunned down 3 people in North Carolina in 1941. Every once in a while, I'll get an email back, and it'll be someone saying, I did not know that my great-grandfather was a moonshiner and killed 3 people. Thank you for bringing this to light. Or someone will tell me, my great-great-aunt was the woman that he murdered. Thank you for showing her in a positive and reasonable light. I had really thought at some point I would get emails from people saying, you dirty dog, why are you trying to profit off the suffering of others? But that hasn't happened yet, so fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've had similar thoughts, maybe not exactly like that, but I always make an effort to speak respectfully of anybody that was affected or anybody that died in these stories. And so far, I haven't gotten anything like that either. In fact, it's been just the opposite, like you said. I've gotten quite a few emails or comments on the podcast apps about, thank you so much, my grandfather was on that ship, or something to that effect. And that means a lot, to be honest, because that's why I do it. I really want to tell the stories and honor the people that were involved, because these were real people and had real lives, and there were real circumstances and choices that had to be made at the time, and all of those circumstances coming together, not just in maritime shipwrecks and things, but any kind of disaster or murder or significant event. There's always a story behind everything, and I think that's what makes history so interesting.
I think there is actually sort of a calling in keeping history alive and reminding people of what happened and how people lived and how people died in different places and in different times. I've written stories as far back as 1808, and I've written stories as late as the 20 teens. And a lot of things changed and a lot of things stayed the same.
Since we're talking about remembering those who are gone and honoring those victims, if anybody would like to donate to the Kim Wall Memorial Fund, you can do so at IWMF.org. You'll see the link to donate to the fund there and information about how to apply and how those funds are used. I'll put that link in the show notes as well.
I have a podcast. It's the Blue Ridge True Crime Podcast. You can find my blog at blueridgetruecrime.com. You can find me on Substack at Blue Ridge True Crime. On Threads, I am, again, Blue Ridge True Crime. And I also write true crime stories on Medium, and they're under my name, Alfred Dockery.
All right, great. This was a great opportunity to have you on the podcast, talking about some true crime and maritime history in one shot.
No, it's a great opportunity for me to be here and have this conversation with you, and I have to say thanks.
For more information about the Kim Wall Memorial Fund, please go to IWMF.org and enter Kim Wall in the search box. More about the life and work of Kim Wall can be found at rememberingkimwall.com. These links are included in this episode's show notes, as well as a link to the book A Silenced Voice by Ingrid and Joachim Wall.